Where's the gun? Where's the Cadillac? Where is there any evidence that put Keffe Davis here?
Picture this. A 63-year-old man sits at a defense table in Las Vegas. Everyone in that courtroom, including his own lawyer, agrees on one basic fact. He did not pull the trigger. He was not the shooter. And yet, right now, he is the only human being on Earth who has ever been charged with murdering Tupac Shakur. For almost 30 years, that case sat in a drawer marked unsolved. No arrest, no trial, no answers. Just theories, documentaries, and a city full of people who said they knew something but never told police. Now, finally, a jury in Clark County is being asked to decide what really happened at a red light on the Las Vegas Strip in September of 1996. But here's the part that should stop you. The single most important piece of evidence in this entire case isn't a gun. It isn't Dina. It isn't a grainy piece of surveillance footage. It's the defendant's own mouth. For close to 2 decades, Duane Keffe D. Davis told the story of that night over and over again to police, to a documentary crew, in a memoir he sold in bookstores under his own name. And now that those words have finally landed him in a courtroom, he's standing up and telling the jury something completely different. So which version is true? And after almost 30 years, can a courtroom actually prove any of it? That question is the whole reason this trial exists. Whether it can answer it is a completely different story, and by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why. Let's start with why this is happening now, because that part alone tells you a lot about how strange this case really is. Tupac was killed in September of 1996. Davis wasn't arrested until September of 2023. 27 years apart, almost to the week. So what changed? Nothing about the physical evidence changed. There was never a murder weapon recovered. There was never a getaway car recovered. There has never been a single independent eyewitness who identified a shooter in open court. What changed was Davis himself. In 2018, he sat down for an on-camera interview for a Bet documentary and described being in the car that night. When the interviewer pushed him to name the shooter, he wouldn't do it. "It just came from the back seat, bro," he said, telling the camera he was sticking to what he called the code of the streets. In 2019, he co-wrote a memoir called Compton Street Legend and used it to lay out, in detail, his version of what happened before, during, and after the shooting. He was not hiding from this story. He was selling it. By the summer of 2023, investigators were closing in for real. In July, police raided the home of Davis's wife in Henderson, Nevada, searching for anything connected to the murder. Word got out fast. 2 months later, in September, Davis was arrested and a Clark County grand jury handed down an indictment. The district attorney stood in front of the cameras that day and made a point of saying that justice delayed doesn't have to mean justice denied. Think about that for a second. Investigators had suspected Davis for years. Detectives had even taken a formal recorded statement from him back in 2008 or 2009 under what he understood to be some form of protection for what he said. But a private police interview is one thing. A published book with his name on the cover sold to the public for profit is another thing entirely. And that distinction is about to become one of the most important legal arguments in this entire trial. And here's something else worth noticing. Even after Davis was finally arrested in 2023, it still took almost 3 more years to get him in front of a jury. The trial was originally set for the summer of 2024, it got pushed to that fall, then to the spring of 2025, then to February of 2026, and finally to August. Davis burned through at least 4 different defense attorneys along the way, the kind of turnover that usually signals a case nobody wants to inherit. By the time his current attorney took the case in the spring of 2026 on a pro bono basis with no fee attached, the discovery file connected to this killing had grown to roughly 14,000 pages, pulled from the Los Angeles Police Department, the Compton Police Department, and the FBI. Almost 30 years of scattered investigation, finally stacked in one room, and someone had to read every page of it before a single juror could even be picked. Now let's go back further, because the reason this case sat cold for so long isn't really a mystery. It's gang politics. Word had traveled almost immediately in 1996 about who investigators believed was involved. The people closest to the shooting came from a world where talking to police wasn't just frowned upon, it could get you killed. There's a detail from that first week that still stings when you hear it. A rapper named Keffe had been riding in the car directly behind Tupac's that night. He told police he could identify the shooter. Investigators never fully followed up. 2 months later, Keffe was shot and killed in an unrelated incident in New York. The lead died with him. For years after that, the case moved in fits and starts. Within days of the shooting, informants inside the same gang circles had already pointed detectives toward Davis's nephew, but that kind of information, secondhand, unofficial, and coming from people who refuse to put their names on anything, doesn't hold up in a courtroom. A widely read Los Angeles Times investigation in 2002 pointed toward a Compton gang connection, but it leaned heavily on unnamed sources and was never enough to bring charges. Suspects were named in the press long before any of them were ever named in an indictment, and the man everyone assumed was the actual gunman. Davis's own nephew, Orlando Anderson, was shot and killed in an unrelated dispute in 1998. He was never convicted of anything connected to Tupac's death. He denied it while he was alive, and because he's gone, he can never be cross-examined, never be confronted with the accusation in a courtroom, and never defend himself against it again. So picture the actual night for a second, because the sequence matters more than most people remember. Tupac was in Las Vegas for a heavyweight fight, Mike Tyson against Bruce Seldon at the MGM Grand. Tyson ended it in under 2 minutes. A first-round knockout, and the crowd was still buzzing as Tupac's entourage pushed through the casino lobby afterward, dozens of people deep. Somewhere in that crowd, someone pointed out a face. Orlando Anderson, a young man tied to a rival gang. Days earlier, according to police, Anderson had been involved in an incident where a death row associate's gold medallion was snatched off him at a shopping mall back in California. Now here he was, alone in a lobby full of the people connected to that beef. Tupac didn't hesitate. Surveillance cameras near the elevator banks caught him throw the first punch. Within seconds, Suge Knight and several others joined in, and Anderson went down hard, kicked while he was already on the ground, before hotel security finally pulled everyone apart. The whole thing lasted less than a minute. It would end up defining the next 30 years. That fight is the hinge this entire case swings on. Prosecutors say that within a couple of hours, Davis, Anderson's uncle, had heard what happened and decided to retaliate. According to the case against him, he got a handgun from an associate, climbed into a white Cadillac with 3 other men, and went looking for Tupac and Knight. They found them stopped at a red light near Flamingo and Koval, a block off the strip, riding in a black BMW. The Cadillac pulled up alongside. Shots came from the back seat, fast and close range. Tupac was hit 4 times. Knight was wounded too, a graze that could have killed him just as easily. The Cadillac peeled off into traffic and vanished into the Las Vegas night. 6 days later, Tupac Shakur was pronounced dead. He was 25 years old. Here's where most retellings of this story stop, because for almost 30 years, that's where the trail went cold. But this is exactly where the actual court case begins, and this is where it gets complicated, because of one detail that a lot of people misunderstand going into this trial. Prosecutors are not arguing that Duane Davis fired a single bullet that night. Say that again in your head, because it matters. The man on trial for Tupac's murder is not accused of being the shooter. So how do you charge someone with murder when you're not claiming they pulled the trigger? This is where Nevada law does something that surprises a lot of people. Under the state's rules for what's called aiding and abetting or accomplice liability, a person who organizes an attack, supplies the weapon, or directs others to carry it out can be charged and convicted of murder just as if they'd fired the gun themselves. The person who actually pulled the trigger doesn't even need to be identified, charged, or alive for that to happen. Prosecutors have laid out several overlapping theories in the charging documents: that Davis directly participated, that he armed and directed someone else, that he conspired with the group to carry it out. Any one of those, if the jury believes it beyond a reasonable doubt, is enough. Even picking the jury for a case like this wasn't simple. 75 potential jurors were brought in on the first day, and the court spent hours just asking who recognized the names connected to the case, who had read the book, who had watched the documentaries, who had already formed an opinion about a killing that's been picked apart online for 3 decades. Nevada's courts don't require jurors to have never heard of a case this famous. They only require that jurors can set aside what they think they already know and judge it purely on what gets presented inside that room. For a story this well known, that's a much higher bar than it sounds. So what does the state actually have to prove that theory? This is where it gets almost uncomfortable. Because the case against Davis is built almost entirely out of Davis. There is no gun in evidence. There is no Cadillac. There's no forensic link tying him physically to the scene. What prosecutors have is nearly 2 decades of his own recorded words. The 2008 police interview, the 2018 documentary confession, the 2019 memoir describing, in his own language, getting the gun, getting in the car, and watching it happen from the front seat. Now here's a detail that should genuinely surprise you because it flips the entire courtroom dynamic on its head. In a normal murder trial, the prosecution spends its time trying to prove the defendant is a liar, a manipulator, someone whose word can't be trusted. In this trial, it's the opposite. The prosecution needs the jury to believe that Duane Davis was telling the truth, back when he wasn't on trial for anything. Meanwhile, his own defense attorney has to stand up and argue that his client is a liar, that the book was fiction dressed up to make money, that interviews were exaggerated for attention. Legal analysts covering the case have pointed out how rare this is. The defendant is, in a very real sense, also the star witness against himself, just not in person, through his own past words. And that creates the defense's entire strategy. Davis's current attorney, a Las Vegas defense lawyer who took the case without charging a fee, has argued that the 2019 memoir may not even reflect what Davis actually said. He's claimed a ghostwriter built much of the book, and that Davis put his name on something he says he never fully read. He's also argued that Davis's earlier interview with police, the one from 2008, was given under an understanding that it would remain protected and couldn't be used against him later. That argument went in front of the judge, and it failed. The court ruled that whatever protection existed around that private interview never extended to what Davis chose to say publicly afterward, in a documentary, in interviews, or in a book he sold for money. In other words, you can't confess for profit and then claim the confession doesn't count. And just days before jury selection began, Davis did something that pulled the rug out from under nearly 2 decades of his own story. In a jailhouse interview, he said he wasn't even in Las Vegas the night Tupac was killed. Not in the car. Not in the city. After almost 20 years of describing, in detail, being in the front seat of that Cadillac, he is now telling the public the opposite. Ask yourself what that does to a jury. Does it look like a man correcting the record? Or does it look like a man who understands that his own words, the ones he once sold for money, might be the thing that convicts him? Here's another wrinkle almost nobody talks about, and it's a big one. For 30 years, the assumption in the public imagination has been that Orlando Anderson, Davis's nephew, pulled the trigger. That belief has shaped documentaries, songs, and internet theories for a generation. But grand jury testimony from another man connected to the same gang circle told a different version. According to that testimony, it wasn't Anderson who fired the shots at all. It was another man in that car, DeAndre Smith, who according to this account said he had a clearer angle and asked for the gun in the final seconds before the shooting. Smith is dead now too, so is Anderson. Neither of them will ever sit in a witness chair and answer for it. Sit with that for a moment, because it's one of the strangest parts of this entire case. Even the detail that feels the most settled, who actually fired the gun that killed Tupac Shakur, is not something this trial is built to resolve. It doesn't have to be. Prosecutors don't need the jury to agree on which of two dead men pulled the trigger. They only need the jury to believe Davis organized the attack and supplied the weapon. That means a guilty verdict in this case, if it comes, will not settle the single question that's haunted this story since 1996. It will answer a narrower one. Did Davis make it happen? Not who fired the shots. Now, a trial this size doesn't happen in a vacuum, and a few other names are going to keep coming up, so it's worth being precise about what's fact and what's speculation. Suge Knight, who was in the car and wounded that night, is currently serving a lengthy prison sentence for an unrelated fatal hit and run. He's on the witness list, but he's publicly said he doesn't plan to testify. If he changes his mind, both sides have reasons to want to hear what he says, because he's the only other living person who was actually in either vehicle that night. Then there's Sean Diddy Combs. In his memoir, Davis claimed Combs wanted Knight and Tupac dead and offered him money to make it happen. That is Davis's allegation made in a book written to sell copies, not a proven fact. And Combs has denied any involvement in the killing for decades. His name is not on the witness list for this trial. Keep that distinction in your head because it's exactly the kind of claim you have to separate from what a courtroom can actually establish. There's also a stranger footnote to all of this. Former Las Vegas Mayor Oscar Goodman. Once famous for defending the very organized crime figures the city built its reputation on, also appears on the witness list, though it's unclear whether he'll ever actually be called to testify. Whether he takes the stand or not, his name being on that list at all says something about how far back this story reaches into Las Vegas itself. So, zoom out. What can this trial actually accomplish? And what can't it? If the jury convicts, Davis faces the possibility of life in prison. That would be the first and only conviction in one of the most famous unsolved killings in American music history, nearly 30 years after it happened. Families who have waited 3 decades for any form of accountability would finally get a verdict with his name attached to it. That matters. That's not nothing. But even a conviction wouldn't hand the world the full story. It wouldn't tell us with legal certainty whose finger was on the trigger. It wouldn't resolve the contradiction buried inside the grand jury testimony about which dead man actually fired the gun. It wouldn't explain why investigators sat on leads for years while witnesses like Yaki Gaddafi died before they could ever testify. And if the jury acquits, that doesn't mean the story people have heard for years is false, either. It would only mean the state couldn't prove its version beyond a reasonable doubt, using words a man said years before anyone accused him of anything. For an entire generation of hip-hop fans, this case was never really about a courtroom. It was about a wound that never fully closed. Whatever this jury decides, it won't undo 30 years of unanswered questions. And it won't bring back a single person who died holding a piece of the truth they never handed over. But for the first time, the American legal system will have put a name and a face in front of 12 strangers and said, "This is the man we believe made it happen." That's the gap this whole trial lives inside. The gap between what people believe happened shaped by a book, a documentary, decades of theories, and what a courtroom sitting in Nevada in the year 2026 can actually stand behind with evidence. After almost 30 years, the real question was never simply whether someone would finally be tried for Tupac Shakur's murder. It's how much of that final night a jury can actually prove happened, and how much of it may stay exactly what it's been since 1996. A story that only the people in that Cadillac ever truly knew, and almost all of them took it to the grave. So when the verdict finally comes down, ask yourself the question this entire case was built on, not just whether Duane Davis is guilty, but whether guilty in this case was ever going to mean the same thing as knowing the whole truth. That's worth sitting with, because after almost 30 years, it still depends on who you ask.